Okay, we're going to get started. It's 1 o'clock Mountain, and I wanted to thank everyone for attending our first 2020 LeanLaw Meetup, Accounting Pro Meetup. And it's, you know, I just want to refresh everyone's mindset about what the spirit of this is. This is not meant to be a formal one-way conversation, but rather a collaborative, group of people that all want to learn a little bit about LeanLaw, learn about the process of servicing law firms. So feel free to engage, interact, ask questions along the way. It's not meant to be one way, although we're going to present some data. I have a few colleagues of mine. Heather Mears happens to be here from LeanLaw. Say hello, Heather.
Hello.
And Fred Willerup will be doing some co-presentation with me as well. A little bit about what we're going to talk about today. Specifically, we wanted this meetup to be focused on the product. There's so many instances where we're learning that, we make assumptions that some of you folks know, like all the ins and outs of the product, and there's just, we probably could do a better job communicating all the features. And we routinely hear folks wanting to just see the product. So today is really focused at showing off the product and certainly talking about it. Now, as we look ahead to the year, February we'll start a 3-part series focused on servicing mid-market clients. Mid-market is, as we mentioned in December, is a huge initiative for LeanLaw this year. We'll be launching a formal mid-market. Typically mid-market means 5 attorneys or more, but a mid-market product into the marketplace, and segmenting that out and making specific marketing efforts to attract more mid-market clients. So February will be about how to win a mid-market client. March will be about how to onboard a mid-market client, and April will be about servicing a mid-market client. So the idea of how to communicate with a mid-market client. Then we'll talk about some of the tactical things of onboarding them, and then ongoing service. We're a little loosey-goosey on May, but we think we're probably going to invite Lauren Fogelman into the group to talk a little bit about her workshop in packaging. I'll speak to some of the things we're doing with Lauren in a minute. We're going to come back to this format in June and do some product updates. September, we'll start the process. How do you approach your client to move off their current platform? And then again, back in October, we'll probably do some more product updates. And then the last meetup of the year, December, will be looking towards 2021. And so, of course, all of this is subject to change, but that's the roadmap. So we'll take that time off during the summer. We'll have some focus in the fall about kind of steering your clients into making the transition in that. One thing I wanted to mention,
What was that?
one thing I wanted to mention
It
is,
sounded like something fell off.
can everyone hear me? Hey, Linda, you gotta be a little quiet. I don't think, okay, should mute yourself. So I just did the first of a 3-part series this year with Lauren Fogelman on pricing. You can see that I'm going to pass these links through the chat. So we did our first Accounting Pro webinar that we got really good feedback. We also did 3 last year. And this is all about business coaching related to accounting practices. So I wanted to make sure that folks knew that was here, and I'll put those in the chat windows shortly so everyone has access to it. All of these webinars, if you click into these, are online and recordable, so you can develop a highly profitable niche that's already online. And then we'll be doing time management secrets for busy accounting professionals and ramping up your business, switching from an employee mindset to a CEO mindset. And last year, just to remind the group, we did these 3, which are again are online and viewable. Step up to a trusted advisor, raise your rates without losing clients, and how to create irresistible packagings. And I'll tell you, the last 2 of these series were really great. So that's there. I wanted to share that with the group. Let me just put that back in. And then lastly, 2 more little points. One is that our good friend Karen Schwartz from Time and Sense, this is her website. She and I just actually had a conversation this morning, and we'll be doing some more work. We'll be doing some more work together to bring Karen's expertise as it specifically relates to migrating clients and her expert abilities in understanding some of the packages that people are coming from as it relates to data migration. So, getting data out of a time slips and other platforms, getting it formatted. So you'll see some activity. We have a blog post coming out in a few weeks when Karen, it's probably safe to say like 2-3 weeks. Is that right?
Maybe a little more, but I'll try.
All right, but we'll have that. And that's going to be some considerations of moving data. So just look for that as our relationship with Karen matures over the year. Last thing, and I'll put all these links in the chat window. Last thing, LeanLaw is hiring an accounting lead. I don't know if that's the right title. This is our Simply Hired post. We're going to send this out to all of our accounting friends. We're looking for an onboarding specialist, someone who can lead our efforts from an accounting standpoint. That's helping clients migrate. That's one big piece of it. That's activating and interacting with our LeanLaw Accounting Pro community, and specifically writing some content that will translate into our credentialing. We talked specifically about that in December, and this person will be leading some of the content generation. So this is a virtual position that can be in Idaho or not, but we're hiring that person. And it starts kind of half-time-ish, and we expect it to move even more as things progress. So LeanLaw would love to talk to you about it if you're interested in helping us fill that accounting lead role with a focus on onboarding and working with the Accounting Pro community. That's what I have. Any comments or questions from the group? Feel free to do that. It looks like Fred's interacting with folks in the chat session. So let's move on and talk a little bit about the product. That's what we're going to do now. So again, any questions, any comments, just either chat us or feel free to speak. If for some reason you're muted, which I see a bunch of people did, we can unmute you, but I think we did this in group setting. So I figured that I was going to start this by going back to the settings and just highlighting a few things in settings so that folks know what they are. And again, this is more of a product tour today. And when I onboard people for settings, now all of you folks who are accounting pros will see this My Firms. And when you look at My Firms, you have the firms, you have your firm, and then you have the firms that you have access to. And this is sort of your switcher and setting up where you can actually launch a new firm. We break the general settings into 3 groupings. My settings, which are the user settings. Team settings are different attributes that are applicable through the whole law firm. And then firm setup. So under My Settings, this is where the users put their info in. And the most important thing here is to know that if I put initials in here or some other data point like paralegal, and the user wants to have the timekeeper's identity on the invoice as a line item, so my initials next to my time entry, this is where we draw that from. So that's where you put your initials in. And there's a feature under invoice setup that allows you to add those initials to the invoice. The other thing here to note is that we can have different starting places for LeanLaw. So your users can set up what they might do. If you have an operator, they might go to billing first, and that just saves a click. Rates are we handle rates, and so we can add different rates. We always want to add rates in the My Rates and then apply that rate class to the matter. We don't want to go into the matter. If I just show you here, when I go into matters and start doing manual rate changes, because if I make a change in a rate, I have to do it individually. If I do it here under rate classes, that applies to everywhere that rate's been applied. Tools are really, the only thing that's really important here is our tracker, which I'll show off a little later. It's our desktop tracker tool that is a companion time tracking tool, and that's where it's downloaded. Under firm setup, I'm going to jump ahead. Firm info, a few things to note here. This has changed a little, of course, the name of the firm, but now we have these 2 custom name fields. They translate back into the matters. If I click into a matter, custom, I have happened to name something claim number, and custom to a client asked us and said, we need a claim number on every invoice, on the header of the invoice. So Fred just said, okay, we'll create some free-form fields that we can add. So under my firm info, I can change that name for 1 and 2. 1 is mappable to the invoice. 2 doesn't map to the invoice. So you can actually map this field to the invoice and automatically pass that data over. This custom checkbox name, is there a question? No, okay.
Jonathan, it would be really nice if there was like an asterisk or a little note next to that that indicates that that one will map and the other one won't. It would just make it really useful to clients.
Yeah, that's a good note. I'll let Fred do that. Fred can make note of that. So
I'm gonna make some notes as you guys give feedback. So rest assured,
this is a new feature we just created. It's called lobbying, and what it means is we had a client that needed to, they're a lobbyist, and they needed that every time they create an entry, they needed to be able to identify different items, a subset of the activity that were specific to their lobbying. You could make it, so when I'm sorry, I clicked off of that. But when I did a time entry, I can check something and it's still billable and still behaves like a time entry, but then I can generate a report later that says of all the time that I did for this client, what subsection was lobbying, what was the value of that, and they needed it for their reporting. We built the feature in a more open way that you can put whatever you want in that checkbox. So when I check that, it allows me to identify and be able to check and say, okay, that was a specific activity. The last thing I want to show here is downloading data. This is a new functionality that allows you to download all of the data that lives in LeanLaw at a click of a button. So if anyone ever needed their data for whatever reason, that feature is there now.
Just a note on the lobbying, that that checkbox is not just on time entries, but also on expenses and fixed fees. Just a detail.
So that could be a value if you have a client that's trying to identify a subset of activity.
It's always going to be
track that.
And on the, are we supposed to interrupt you and ask you questions?
Yeah.
Or should I write them in the chat?
No, go ahead. Ask a question.
So on the custom checkbox name, I can see using that for my clients who do stuff that's personal or private, or the state is state cases versus non-state cases anyways. And so I was wondering, would that get pushed into QuickBooks anyway or no? And then when you download LeanLaw data, then you can still sum it up and see how much was spent on a particular custom thing, is that right?
Fred, go ahead and answer that, Fred.
It does not go to QuickBooks. There's a report currently that uses this field, so it splits up time, bill time entries, expenses, and fixed fees depending on whether that checkbox is set or not. It's the lobbying report at the top, and lobbying will change depending. In terms of the export, yeah, you can export the lobbying or the custom checkbox as part of the export, so you can do your own reporting that way if you wanted to do that. I would say that it's kind of in many cases maybe you should be using practice areas instead. There's more reporting opportunities by separating things by practice area. Or it might even be that, you have two categories of stuff. Maybe those things should be two different matters under the same client. So yeah, there might be some use cases apart from lobbying where this applies, including the one you mentioned, but there are some other mechanisms to kind of slice the data up that might be better.
I'm going to move on, and Brandy, just ping us if we didn't get through the whole question. So I'm under the users tab now. So we've gone from firm info, I skipped subscription, although, we always want people to subscribe. Under users, this allows us to invite users. If I click into a user, these are the standard fields. Let me go to this David Cohen character. Just to walk through what this means, first name, last name, those are those initials for invoicing, what I mentioned earlier. That stamps what will appear on an invoice if we choose that. And then there's some classing opportunities here. If you have classing turned on, that's QuickBooks classing. Access to firm setup means that they would have access to all of the setup features. Include in all matters means that anytime a matter was added to LeanLaw, that person would have access to it. If you don't use that include, then you have to manually add the users to a particular matter. It's always best if you are uncertain about that to not include all, because you can always add it later. But what you can't do is if you've included all, say, oh, now I want these 75 matters not to be part of that user's profile. That's super hard. That's very manual. So including all matters for smaller firms always tends to be the default, but it's just something to be mindful of. Revenue to responsible means that if that user is a paralegal or some subordinate and they produce $1,000 of revenue for a particular matter, by clicking this box, that revenue would be applied to the responsible attorney. So that when you run your compensation reports, you don't have a paralegal's income. It's just that paralegal's income would go right up to that attorney. So that's all automated for you. And then of course, rates are rates.
I want to add one thing here, which is when Jonathon talked about us kind of launching or splitting out a high-end mid-market product and having a simpler product later this spring. And one area where we feel we can simplify for many clients is this include on matters and the whole rate management. Especially for you guys, the accountants, it seems like one idea is that accountants should always have access to everything, and you shouldn't have to assign yourself manually to individual matters and so on. So there's just some things that we've found that a lot of you are struggling with, and it becomes a little messy over time in the accounts that we want to simplify. So just flagging that in case you have ideas, I'd love to hear them, but some simplification coming to this area in a few months, I'm hoping.
Okay, I got to kind of crank through this because we're going to run out of time for the other things we want to show. Under QuickBooks, this is where we set up our QuickBooks. Most of this is pretty straightforward, so I don't want to get into too much detail, but I do want to mention this one area here because this tends to be the tricky one. Client and matter-based billing are specific to QuickBooks, whether you want a customer or sub-customer invoicing. So a client in LeanLaw maps to a customer in QuickBooks. A matter under matter-based billing in LeanLaw maps to a sub-customer. So that plays its hand in both how accounts receivable is managed at the sub-customer level, but also how trust allocation is handled. So if you have a corporate client that has many matters and each client needs to be unique from an accounts receivable standpoint, matter-based billing tends to be the choice. In many instances, attorneys use matter-based billing when really client billing would suffice. On the QuickBooks side, when we look at matter-based billing on the chart of accounts as it relates to trust accounting, we actually see, let me see if I can find one. Here, Hessington Oil. That's matter-based billing, which means that each matter would have its own subledger, versus client-based billing, it's a single level. And so on the client side, whoops, on the client side under sales, clients, you see the same thing, that you have client-based billing for the majority of this, but at some point we might get a matter-based billing like Karen Sacker. She has 2 different matters. So that just sets the default preference for the firm. Then in any time in any matter, if you have a matter that you say, you know what, I prefer this to be client-based billed, we just come in here and override the default for the firm. So that this decision is what's the default. This decision is overriding the default for the firm and making it specific for the client. That's all I want to speak to there, other than this is the import from QuickBooks. If there are clients in QuickBooks that need to be brought over as a function of importing, this is where that tool where we can do that. I don't have any good examples, but we would assign it who the responsible is and then also identify what the matter is. And that would map that QuickBooks client back to LeanLaw. Let's see. Trust accounting, it's pretty straightforward. I'm using multiple trust accounts. The consideration there is the use of undeposited funds. If you check this box when we receive trust deposits or when we pay an invoice from trust, that would go to undeposited funds versus the respective bank accounts. Billing workflows, something to note here is this administrative fee that's been added. So this allows you to create a percentage. Administrative fee is that firms that want to charge a certain percentage overhead to every invoice. We can do that in an automated way. And then this allows you to both assign a label for the invoice and then a specific product and service in QuickBooks to pass that income through. Interest on expenses is really for contingency clients. I know I'm going fast, so don't feel like you can't ask questions later. Interest on expenses just means that if I'm paying for my client's expenses, in some states and some law firms, they choose to charge interest on that. So this is setting that interest parameter, and it's simple interest, not compounded. So if you add an expense for a contingency matter and say, okay, let's charge interest on it, that's the number is derived from there. This is setting up our leads and turning on leads billing. You know what this is if you needed to bill it for a client, but it tends to be for corporate insurance billing. Invoice presentation is all about tweaks that we modify the custom form style from QuickBooks. And the big one that tends to be is this one, structure, which adds these groupings here and then some sub features that has LeanLaw put the dates in. If we turn those off, the product and service repeats itself in QuickBooks, handles that. And we have to make sure that if we turn these on, there's some features in the QuickBooks form style that we need to turn off. And that's sort of articulated here. This is where that mapping occurs. We talked about the claim number in that custom form. So this is different data points that we can add in LeanLaw to be mapped to an invoice in an automated way. This is a new feature that we just added. And this says that, Fred, will you explain this? Invoice dates, you're better at it than I am.
Yeah, when we create an invoice in LeanLaw, batch create invoices, we use the last day of the billing period, and the billing period is basically the date filter you use when you create the invoice. So I might say, hey, show me all December time and earlier. So we will, if this option is set, we will set the invoice date to the December 31st. Even though we might be creating this today in January. The reason we want the date to be in the month where the billing takes place is that some of the reporting works better that way. But some clients would like for the invoice date to be when it was created, and this is where you can change that.
Thanks, Fred. That was great.
But it affects reporting of billed amounts. That's kind of the key thing here. Before you sort of change this, you need to be aware of that.
And then report settings play into if we're tracking origination for the firm and what percentage that should be. Boy, that's a high number. Does the firm have any share? Meaning, depending on how firms manage their compensation, some firms say the first 25 cents to every dollar goes to firm for overhead. So that's the firm share. Or originating means that I originated some work, Fred was the working attorney, I get a certain percentage of his collected monies for that. This goes back into managing revenue allocation that we talked a little bit about that paralegal. This is saying that if you don't tag someone's name on a fixed fee, meaning if I come into a client, I add a fixed fee and I don't add a user here, I neglect to do that. This feature is saying, well, let's just give that to the responsible attorney. And this says, what does this one mean, Fred? Again, all services? I just don't want to say it wrong.
That just means that, like, if you're trying to check it right now, it basically means all services, hours, and fixed fees go to the responsible attorney. So our revenue by attorney reports basically just are concerned with responsible attorneys, not who contributes to invoices.
Okay. Client matter IDs are just how we set up our client IDs. I won't spend a lot of time with that, but that just creates automated client and matter IDs depending on your preferences. I'm going to jump up into team settings. This is something that's often, let me get rid of that one, I hate that one. This is often overlooked. When I do a time entry in LeanLaw, wherever I do it, from the calendar, from the desktop tracker, and I create an entry, we have these tasks that can serve as pre-formulated text. And that does two things. It helps facilitate a time entry, but it also can create uniformity to a time entry. So those are managed under tasks here by either just adding them or deleting them as you see fit. Fred mentioned practice areas earlier. This is a new addition that we had in the fourth quarter. And they're free form. You can name them whatever you want. Some people use them for location versus practice area, so it doesn't have to be practice area, although that's the label. And that will translate directly into some reporting. So you can see, revenue by practice area and different tags to look at how practice area, billables by practice area. And when I create a matter, using this plus button, you'll see that practice area is where we assign it here. And there's some settings here that says, require a practice area, which one's the default, etc. Fixed fee templates are just ways of adding templates so that if you do repeatable fixed fees, you can tick them in a more succinct way. And expense templates work the exact same way with that. So I just wanted to run through that because I think a lot of times people don't know that all of that's there. Fred, I want to turn the con over to you, and I want you to kind of talk a little bit about some of the billing workflow. We spoke to it a little bit during our last meetup, but now we want to get into it a little more detail. So I'll stop the share, Fred, and you can take over.
All right. Thanks, Jonathan. I mean, it's obviously this is like a super fast forward presentation, but the idea here is that there's probably one or two things, or maybe even more, in there that you guys, that you guys didn't know about. And even though we don't have a lot of time right now to really go into depth with any one thing, feel free to follow up and ask, hey, this one thing, what is that? And let's get some more info on that. So the idea here is a little bit of a fast forward tour to kind of just make you aware of what's here in case you could use something that you haven't used before. So I want to talk about two things. One is the billing workflow that we launched here recently, or have launched, and then also run through kind of a fast forward of reports, because we made some changes there too. So those are the two things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to click on this thing that says switch back here to start with, because it's likely that you and your client's account look like this, where you have ready to bill, so this is open, time, and expenses, and then you have drafts and approved, maybe approved, and then what we have here is like open invoices and paid invoices, and you have different options on the open, like you could download some stuff and do some different things on the paid. Now, if you have open and paid tabs here, you can click on try new workflow over here on the left, and it'll change to our new workflow, which we sort of have pre-launched, but we're going to make this the default and eventually get rid of the old way here pretty soon. So I really strongly encourage you to switch over to this new one because it has more features and it's better, we think. So the idea here is that now I have a QuickBooks tab, which basically is a view into all my invoices in QuickBooks, whether they're open, partially paid, whether they've been emailed, whether they're still waiting to be emailed, and so on. And I can do a bunch of things. There's different ways to filter it. By default, you start out with invoices that are not paid. So that's what we called open invoices before. But you can see all invoices by Xing out this filter. So now I'm basically seeing all invoices. I can filter it by time period, that's the invoice date, or by all the usual things here, client matter, responsible attorney, and so on. So I can kind of slice down the invoices that way. So we saw that I could see just open invoices. I can also see overdue invoices, or I can just see paid invoices. So the overdue thing is new, and we're showing a column over here that shows when the invoice is due. That's also new. So we're just kind of bringing more information over from the QuickBooks invoice to be shown here. So if I scroll down here, you should be able to see some overdue invoices. I guess they're all overdue. There's also some that might be red if they're more than 60 days overdue. So that allows me to kind of look at invoices. Now, what can we do with invoices? We've added, well, there's basically two things we can do to QuickBooks invoices. We can pay them, either just record a payment, normal payment, or we can pay from trust. So there's functions over here for the open invoices for recording a payment and paying from trust. We can also deliver the invoices, and there's kind of two options. We can either print them or we can email them. Now, in terms of payments, let's start with that. Oh, and I should say you can all of these functions are available over here for individual invoices over on this little drop down. Or you can scroll, you can select all or some of the invoices with the checkboxes here. And then at the bottom, there's batch functions. Like I can check all of them, click here and say, email all of these to the clients. So there's some really powerful batch functions down here that can be used. Okay, so payments. Let me see here, sorry. Let's try and pay this invoice here. If I do pay from trust, it will record a payment for that invoice for the full amount if that is available in the trust account. I can adjust the amount or the date and then say pay from trust. It'll create two records, one payment and one deposit, or sorry, one check that moves money from the trust account to the operating account. So let's look at so that's just a brief overview of sort of payment features in here. Let me and what's new is that we used to only have payment from trust. Now we can also just record a normal payment from, this just creates a payment record in QuickBooks. We have the amount. You can set the payment method. This reference goes over to QuickBooks as well, and you can say pay. This also works in batch. If I have a client picked, a specific client picked, pick a bunch of invoices for that client, and then go down and pay either from trust or an individual payment. It'll just create one payment record in QuickBooks with all those invoices linked to that one payment. So it does here what you'd expect, I think, in terms of creating the corresponding records in QuickBooks. So before I move on to the delivery, printing and emailing invoices, any questions about that?
Brandy has a question, and she said, if there's a partial payment, how does it decide which invoices are paid first? Great question.
And what I mean on that, if it's got 5 invoices for the one client and they send in a payment, which of the 5 does it decide to do?
I think, I don't remember, I think.
Oldest to newest, probably.
Yeah, but the reason I'm hesitating is I don't remember if that is something QuickBooks handles for us automatically. So it'll just be whatever is the default over there. Or if we have some logic built in that does this. I can get back to you on that. I don't remember what it does, but yeah, it should, I guess, do the old ones first, and then maybe a partial payment for one of them, and leave the other ones unpaid. I don't remember what it does.
I think what's important to note here is the reason there's a few things that we built that was specific to clients' needs. We weren't just sort of randomly trying to do this. The first thing was the idea of the email filter. I think the whole premise first was we kept hearing from the accounting community and from our law clients, please build more functionality into LeanLaw because we don't want to have people to go to QuickBooks and do things. So that was the theme. The second was to try to solve specific problems. One was batch functionality, the idea that maybe there's 20 invoices that need to be paid from trust, and having to go in and do 3 to 5 clicks. In our old method, this is now 1 click, multiple payments. So there was an automation feature. And then the third piece was this idea that, you know, when you have a larger firm, there's a complexity on what needs to be emailed and what needs to be printed, and trying to navigate that in QuickBooks. The genesis behind the delivery was that we have a client in Cleveland that was doing 2,000 invoices a month, and a certain subsection were all, certain percentage of those were emailed and a certain percentage were printed, and they were struggling in QuickBooks to delineate of what was to be sent, what should go by email and what shouldn't. So we just built this feature. Fred, could you jump into a matter into QuickBooks just so you can see where it's set?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the delivery next.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate, I like that you pointed out kind of the high level reasoning here, that this basically gives a billing person in the law firm a little more control and features that keeps them out of QuickBooks potentially. But yeah, I did want to, like the example, just to stay on payment a little bit longer here, the example that you mentioned, Jonathan, that there was one client who had a bunch of trust payments every month. You also have a filter here that you can say, hey, show me all clients, or show me all invoices that have trust balances next to them. Then show me all the not paid invoices. So I have all the ones that are not paid and that have trust funds. So that's all these ones here. Like some of them have enough trust to pay for the entire invoice, some of them don't. But I can basically just click here, and then I can say pay from trust, and it'll pay all those 10 invoices with a certain date up to the trust amount of the full invoice. This has saved at least one of our clients like days of manual work. So so that's the kind of thing you can do if you apply the right filters up here and the right batch functions. So one example. The other one is the delivery, as Jonathan was getting to. What we're doing there is we're basically tapping into QuickBooks's options for delivery. There's a global setting for a QuickBooks account that you probably are aware of, called preferred delivery method here. Oh, where did it go?
Under sales.
Oh yeah, so this one here, you can either have no preference, or you can do send later or print later. So basically send and print later will either get the invoices ready for emailing or for printing. And that can be overridden for each client, as I'm sure you're aware. So when I go to a client and I go to their payment and billing tab here, now this overrides that default, which is looked at for the firm as a whole. What we've done is we basically, we're tapping into those settings. So under each matter, under the QuickBooks tab, we have the ability to set that default, email, or print. And when I change this, I'm literally changing the setting over in QuickBooks. We don't actually keep track of this in LeanLaw. It's just a little window into that one setting for each of those clients.
And it's a medium too. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So I changed this. This happened to be the same client, I think. I changed this to print later. So if I refresh here, it should have changed to print already over here. Let's see. Man, it's slow.
Yikes.
Yeah. something is very slow suddenly. Anyway, I changed it to print later here. So similarly, if I want to change it back, I can do it in QuickBooks, and when I refresh over here, it should just flip back over to email over here. So I'm just saying that setting is really just it's just kept track of by QuickBooks. Now, when we create an invoice, and it goes to draft and then onto QuickBooks, initially it'll be either ready to print or ready to be emailed, depending on these settings. Like if my default setting for the firm is that I want to email everything and I don't have it overridden by the client, then it'll say to email over here. That'll be the delivery status. I can filter all the invoices by anything that's ready to deliver, email or print, or just the ones that are ready to email. There wasn't any of those ready to print. So this filter here, show me all the ones that haven't been emailed or haven't been printed, can be used to then batch email or batch print those invoices. So let's say I want to just print all of the invoices that haven't been printed yet for the client. I just click over here, go, verify, go down, and then I say deliver. And there's two options for print delivery. We can create one big combined PDF of all the invoices with just this one big monster PDF file that you can then send to a printer. Or we can download all the invoices as individual PDF files in one big zip file. So those are the two options for print. If I click on this, it'll change the status in QuickBooks and in LeanLaw to from to print to printed. So doing this will flip the status over.
Fred, there was a question going back to
I think
real quick. So Amelia asked, when you record a payment, is there a place to record the payment method that the client used to pay the invoice, like check, credit card, etc.?
Right here.
Yeah. Did you put?
So that's part of the little dialogue that comes up. If you do print individual printed PDF, Linda, are you talking about the download as PDF in a zip file? How the individual files are named? Okay, I don't remember the specific naming convention, but it's a combination of the invoice number, the client and matter, and the invoice date. And we do truncate the client and matter down to, let's see here. We truncate them down so that it just doesn't become a crazy long file name. But if I go here, we'll have a little look in this file. Oh.
Does it matter if the payments start in QuickBooks or LeanLaw?
This doesn't seem to work.
Karen, I'll get to that question.
They are named by, I don't know what went wrong there, but they are named by invoice number, invoice date, and a truncated client and matter name. So,
Fred, Karen,
another question.
Karen asked, does it matter if the payments start in QuickBooks or LeanLaw? I'm not sure if I understand the question, but
it doesn't. So when you create a payment from LeanLaw, it creates the payment in QuickBooks. If you create it in QuickBooks directly, it's going to be the end result of that is the balance of the invoice, and also with the reporting of collected revenue. All that is the same. So there's no difference between recording a payment in QuickBooks or doing it from LeanLaw.
Fred, could you show the Friedman feature? When you download a batch of invoices for a client, it does that cover that summary page. Remember, it does. So they have one client with multiple matters, and then it summarizes all the invoices with expenses and fees on that summary page. You know.
Oh yeah. Sorry. I was trying to figure out what you were. Yeah. So if I print a bunch of invoices here from, are you referring to,
Yeah.
see here.
The summary
I shouldn't
page, the summary page that we created.
Yeah, I printed way too many here. So when we print a bunch of invoices, either by just clicking this print button, or that's the same as the combined PDF button here, we add a summary page. Oh, it seems to be unhappy with our PDF files at the moment. Oh, okay. I'm not sure what's going on here. Let me try less files.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. My machine might be unhappy.
Probably an Apple
with
problem.
the PDF.
Mac problem.
Okay, so so I showed you printing. The same thing applies to emailing, and you can just sort of be aware that this filter and these batch functions are really powerful for just managing the invoice workflow. Some of this had to be done over, and all of this had to be done over in QuickBooks before, but now you can do it directly from LeanLaw. So that's kind of a high level fast forward of this invoice workflow here. Any further questions about this before I head over to some reports in the last 10, 15 minutes?
I'm going to share my screen just for a half second, Fred, so that I can show that report, because it's kind of an interesting report. So bear with me just for a second. Can you, so let's share. So this is, the reason I wanted to show you is this is, can everyone see my screen? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
So this is a really useful report if a client has wanting to summarize essentially a series of invoices. So you can pick one client that might have multiple matters, and this summary page tells you all invoice numbers, of course, the client, the matter, the fees, the expenses, and the total amount. And it'll even put the law firm name. It's close to, so it's sort of close to us printing a statement, but it just makes it easy so you could summarize in one page a series of invoices broken out, then the invoices will all follow. The client that we made this for had 100 matters for a particular client, so they wanted a summary page to break out all of the matters and then the total amount due there. So that's why that was created. I just wanted to show the group that because it's a really useful tool. Okay, back to you, Fred.
Can you stop sharing, please?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it again. I always seem to lose it. There it is. Okay.
So Derek asked, where's that report at? It's not really a report. It's the first page that appears when you batch print invoices. So on this page here, if I print all these invoices, the first page of that PDF file will be that page Jonathon just showed. So when he said report, it's a little misleading. So does that answer your question, Derek? Brandy, sorry, Derek.
Does the report also show the trust balance? Where is that report at?
Okay, let me go to reports then. A great segue. We really only have 10 minutes here, so we'll zip through this really quick. But I want to make so we're not going to go into depth at all here. But there are a couple of new reports and some interesting ones that you definitely should know about. So I want to make sure you're aware of these. One thing is that there's this one support document that that I wrote that I want to share with you. If I can find the chat button, the chat thing. I guess Jonathon, can you share this? I can't find the thing.
Yeah,
because this outlines it's really critical to understand this when you browse through reports. And we basically have three things that are very important concepts to understand: billable, billed, and collected. Billable is anything that that can be billed or has been billed. So hours and fixed fees and so on that are marked billable. billed is anything that's on an invoice, and this includes draft invoices. So that's something that needs to be understood. Finally, collected basically means payments that are collected from invoices. So anyway, there's some details here, and the thing that's kind of confusing is how this works with dates. And some of our reports show a combination of billed and collected, for example. It's very important to be aware of what your date filters will show. And so I just encourage you, we don't have time to go through the detail here, but this is a really important support document that I encourage you all to look at, just to kind of get the basics of reports understood. So back to reports, let me zoom out a little bit. We have a bunch of reports on the left here. They're kind of combined, or they're grouped by, you know, some of them relate to billable things. There's some contingency reports that are new, and we're still developing these. These don't appear until you have at least one matter over here marked as contingency. So there's this little magic bit or those reports will basically be invisible until you have at least one matter marked as contingency. So that's something to be aware of. That's not necessarily obvious. So that's those. Revenue reports, really powerful reports that basically are concerned with primarily collected revenue for clients and splitting it out different ways. And then we have a collection of quote unquote other reports, kind of put them here if we don't know where else to put them. But so a couple of new ones that I want to show you. There's the lobbying one that we already covered. This basically splits up, there's not any data in here that's relevant, but it splits up all bill time based on the lobbying, or sorry, the custom checkbox, whether the custom checkbox is checked or not. In this case, it's set to lobbying. And then there's the contingency reports. This is a bigger topic, and also, as I said, something we're still working on. But this is used in contingency firms to get a status of sort of every, you know, the outstanding, you know, where we're at with these different clients in terms of especially expenses, but also accumulated time and so on, relative to, you know, trust money and collected and so on. I'm not really explaining this, but I'm in a hurry.
That's a really so this is a really important report. If you have any personal injury attorneys or anyone who does something on a contingent basis. And the reason being is it gives you a real-time, immediate synopsis of what the firm is holding in terms of expenses, which is a cost for the firm from a cash flow standpoint. It also is a communication point that allows the attorney to walk into a meeting and say, this is where we stand in terms of expenses. So it's a really, really critical report. And then if you had checked interest on the matter, it would also, we don't have good data here, but it would show what interest has been accrued.
Yeah, we're not, thank you for that way better description, Jonathan. We don't have some good data in here, but at least now you know that.
Go to Rob Elveld.
What's that?
Go to contingency, Rob Elveld.
Okay.
High school friend of mine who left my car really dirty one time.
Forgive and forget. Yeah, so this is some of our contingency fee clients go to this particular report when they meet with a client. They do print for client, which actually which adds our firm's makes it look a little nicer. I apparently can't print on my machine anymore, sorry. But anyway, this is used ahead of printing, ahead of meeting with a client to show where they're at in terms of the expenses that have been accumulating.
And keep in mind, those could be expenses entered in LeanLaw or in QuickBooks.
Yeah.
Both will be summarized there. So
Uh,
that expense work
very-
happening on the QuickBooks side, they'll be captured over on the LeanLaw side if they're tagged appropriately.
Two brand new reports, trust report. So before you had to go here, there was, the trust report, quote unquote, was basically over here, which is still relevant for managing trust accounts. You see over under billing and trust account, and here's your stuff. And you can do different things, but there's a better sort of report format report of all your clients that have trust money, which is shows the client who's responsible, the trust balance. If I have multiple trust accounts, it'll show which one it's in. We then show that with ready to bill, so basically work in progress or WIP, and then a ratio here, WIP to trust ratio. So what this means is if I filter here by, or sort here by this, like if we look at this client here, I've accumulated stuff ready to bill for like $1,000 or $1,700, but I only have $500 in trust. So I'm like in the red. I basically need, this is a very actionable report that says if this approaches 100% or is over, some firms, or you probably need to go and ask for more trust money for this client.
Check the box, Fred, on the left that says include zero balance. It's easier to see. No, that didn't work.
So yeah, this includes any clients that have zero balance with the
Zero trust balance. I thought that would be real zero.
So that's what this report is. We're actually building this. So this is useful right now, but we are in the process of building some evergreen retainer features that also will impact this report, where an evergreen is a client has a certain it's basically a minimum trust balance that has to be upheld, and so we'd have reporting based on the evergreen amount for clients if that's set, and we also will update. We'll have options to update the trust memo that we put on invoices when we create them. So anyway, just a little pre-announcement that we'll have some evergreen features here.
What's important here is that if an attorney came to you and said, can you show me a list of all my clients that have a trust balance? All you have to do is check that responsible attorney button, and it would narrow that set to the matters that they're responsible to, and it would show all the clients with the trust balance, and then of course any WIP and whatnot. And then that can all be exported to Excel as needed if you need to manipulate it, or just printed to PDF and sent over. We didn't have that before, and that just quickly summarizes that and allows you to export and print it.
Okay.
Almost at the end, Fred, so
almost at the end. I want to show one new report here, matter activity. That's also brand new. This is basically, this allows you to show, basically a list of all matters, when they were opened, when they were closed or archived, and when there was last activity. What some clients ask, or the reason it's here is that some clients ask to see, hey, I want to see all the matters that were opened last month. So I can do that by filtering based on opened in period, and then I say last month. And so here's my list of all the clients that were opened in that period. Or maybe it's the archived in that period. Well, there weren't any, but anyway, this is brand new and hopefully useful. So,
hey Fred, Karen had a question. Back to the trust report. She said, "Can you explain the time period on the trust? Is it showing as of date?"
This is actually this shouldn't even be here. We ignore the time period on this particular report. So it's actually a bug. It shouldn't even appear.
Even though this is going to run over a few minutes, Fred, can you go back to reports, the list, please? And can you just run through for the group what the other reports do, just so because I think there's one in particular.
So,
I'm mostly under other, because the others, I think the other ones are self-explanatory.
Okay. Fixed fee for profitability. This takes all the fixed fee matters and shows compares the fixed fees I've charged and compares that against all the hours I've tracked and their value, and then shows a difference. So it sees, you know, basically it shows whether I'm in the black or red when it comes to the fixed fees. Period reports. This is sort of a catch-all, a useful report that can show you different things, a bunch of different parameters here, grouped by different options, clients, users, or practice areas. And then different time periods, year to date by month, last year by month, quarterly, et cetera, et cetera. So this is kind of our most sort of generic report that you can kind of play around with different parameters and dimensions.
Why that's important is, as an example, we had a client who's a contingency practice, and they needed to look at all of the open expenses last year as a function of their line of credit, or multiple years. So they wanted to look at blocks of what they're holding in expenses year over year, because they needed to hand that to the bank for a line of credit. So there's different uses of that period report that can be very productive for the law firm.
Yeah. Timekeeper productivity. This is basically a report that just shows hours billed, unbilled totals, and expenses for each user in the system. Matter rates. This is to review rates that I've set for all the matters, so you can kind of get an overview and, you know, make sure that none of your rates are out of whack. And client contact information also should be obvious. So yeah, sorry for the fast forward here at the end, but hopefully it was useful to get that. We're out of time. If you have, well, I'll let Jonathon wrap up here, but if you have any questions or like anything you want more in depth, just reach out independently and we'll get you some more info.
There's two things I wanted to say. Is one, thanks to you all for participating and listening and actually being interested. It means a lot to Fred and I. Secondly, I'd love to hear your feedback if you thought this was valuable. This type of a report, or this type of meeting, is it too broad? Would you wanted us just to, you know, narrow it down to just trust accounting and spend an hour on trust accounting? We're really open to this. This is something that Fred and I talked about that we need to do more of at the accounting, LeanLaw Accounting Pro level, but also at the client level, in having these types of meetings to focus on how to use LeanLaw. I hope that some of you discovered some features that maybe didn't exist before. That's the real problem that we were trying to address today. So we're really interested in hearing your feedback about this type of a meeting and any content you want. So Linda said something, love the new reports too, thanks for doing it. And okay, so people are saying, more advanced. How much advance notice do you want, Karen? I mean, I think that we're trying to not bombard you with emails, but do you want like a 1 month, 2 week, you know, day before kind of notice of these things? Is that too much? Anyone can respond to that. 1 month, please. Okay, all right, enough said. We'll do a month, and then we'll do maybe a week before and then the day of, kind of the classic webinar, because I feel we'll get more people there. So if there's no more questions, you all know how to reach me. Fred, thanks, you were awesome.
Likewise.